Welcome here at the Diplomatic Academy. As a host of this house, it's always a pleasure, normally say, to welcome organizations discussing topical issues. The topic you have tonight is one where I can welcome that we have to discuss it. I welcome everybody who is here, the excellencies, the presidents of institutes, and especially the speakers. I guess the question of the security architecture after this war is one where we will not find answers tonight. But a few things we know for sure. We know that in Austria there is not enough discussion about consequences for the European security architecture. Some people say this is a consequence of our non-discussion about neutrality. Others say it's simply that we are a land of the blessed, as a pope once said. We are far away from the war. We all know that is not true. So we have to lead this discussion, whatever the outcome is. And secondly, we know the only reliable security architecture we know is NATO at the moment in Europe. And this is something, again, which is difficult to discuss in Austria, but I guess our friends from the Baltics will help us to understand things a little bit better. And my last point is, here in Vienna we have the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation, and we know that the OSCE is immobilized at the moment. That's a clear consequence of the war in Ukraine. But we are all hopeful that after the war there will be a chance for multilateralism in Europe again, also as far as security is concerned. So I shouldn't give an introduction, I should just say welcome from my side and I wish you an interesting evening. Thank you.
So, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear colleagues, I am welcoming all of you here today, and I would like to thank Ambassador Emil Briggs for his nice words. And at the outset, of course, I would like to express my appreciation to our partners for helping to organize this event today. It's Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy, and its president, Dr. Werner Faslaben, Lithuanian Military Academy, and Vienna Diplomatic Academy, of course, as well. And our partners provided us a very valuable support and intellectual input for this event. And of course, my special thanks are addressed to the speakers of this event and moderator, Professor Giedrius Česnakas, Mr. Justinas Juozaitis, Major Albin Rentenberger, and of course, great expert of our region and great expert of OSCE, Ambassador Christian Stober. The idea behind the topic for this event was not only the current extremely dangerous and difficult security situation in our region, not only the decisions of NATO summit that was held a couple of months ago in Vilnius, but mainly the history of Lithuania, the history of the region, which is not very well known by many in Austria. The history that leads us to reality, the history that helps us to understand today's world, and the history that provides us with a guidance for the future. And based on lessons learned, we are projecting our future engagements. Grand Duchy of Lithuania, once the biggest country in Europe, has gone through difficult and turbulent times. Only in the 20th century, Lithuania was twice occupied by Russia and once occupied by Germany during Second World War. Twice it established its independence, lost its capital, suffered tremendous losses of population during Second World War, its Holocaust, deportations to Siberia, losses during and after the war, emigration to West, all of which caused us loss of approximately 1/3 of our population. But as Phoenix rose from the ashes, Lithuania created an independent state again, and 20 years ago joined EU and NATO, and today is leading country in many areas of industry, innovations, famous for its modern art and architecture, and investing in science and education. At the same time, we must invest tremendously in our security infrastructure. Our defense expenditures have increased almost up to 2.5% of our GDP. Our neighbors Russia and Belarus are threatening the whole Europe, committing terrible crimes in Ukraine, have occupied territories of Georgia and Ukraine, of course. Population of Lithuania, government, private business, sport and art celebrities are supporting Ukraine with all their means. We are not tired. We always ask what else we could do to help our brothers and sisters in Ukraine. And we all know that Ukraine will win this war, and we will all help to rebuild Ukraine and create modern, prosperous and strong country. And we are united in this effort with Austria and people of Austria. And we all have to ensure that perpetrators of this terrible aggression will be made accountable, that all crimes will be registered, documented, investigated, and subsequently perpetrators will be judged. By organizing this event, we wanted to give you our perspective, to present with you from Vilnius on the security challenges, on partnerships we create and cherish, and answers to the political dilemmas we have and perspectives we would like to see and help to achieve. And to present our view on the historical context of the current war of aggression. So let me once again to welcome you all and invite you to actively participate in the discussion, and as well as to continue discussing with participants of the podium after the official part of this discussion with a glass of wine later on. So thanks a lot, and Minister, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I also want to welcome you heartily to this tonight's or today's event. And I also want to thank the Academy and its director, Emil Brix, for being a host for us. And of course, I especially want to thank also the Embassy of Lithuania for this excellent cooperation in preparing this event. Because I think it's quite interesting to have tonight specialists from the two countries, small, medium-sized countries in Europe, the one neighboring not only Russia and Belarus, but also having been for quite some time part of the Tsarist and the Soviet Empire. On the other hand, a country neutral in the center of Europe. And therefore, I'm quite sure that there will be quite highly interesting perspectives from both sides looking at this war. I do not want to go into meddling into the affairs. This is a question for our specialists today. I just want to welcome also our board members. Ernest Huber is here, all the ambassadors, diplomats, generals, and academics. It's always a pleasure to have you here. And I only have to announce that we will have a slight difference to what we had announced with our moderator. It is not Ambassador Martin Seidig, but Ambassador Christoph Strohal. Ambassador Seidig did not feel very well, and therefore we had to change. But I think this is a change we can be very happy about, because Christoph Strohal, he studied in Vienna, also in Great Britain. He made his doctorate in law, joined already very long time ago foreign ministry, and he already became a delegation member in the Helsinki process before this whole development between East and West in Europe had started, or just when it had started. And he was not only at the beginning over there, but he followed in different functions, you know. He became more or less the Austrian representative for OSCE affairs in different functions. He worked as a head of office for OSCE in Warsaw, also in other embassies as ambassador. And so far, I guess he is quite familiar with all the questions. I want to thank him especially. But before I hand over, I also have to say, I do not want to hold back with my own perspective in a few words. I'm pretty sure personally that at the moment we are in a very decisive phase, or at least pre-decisive phase for the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian troops are moving forward slowly, slower than most of us or many people expected, but still they are moving. And at the same time, it also looks that Russia's position in Crimea is not the same anymore as it used to be just half a year ago. And certainly the question whether Ukraine can manage to push forward, or at least to shape as a camp, a fortified camp, very close to Azov Sea, probably will be decisive or pre-decisive for what can go on after the winter, because now we only have a few weeks left. Of course, we also have to be aware that Russia will do everything in order to prevent it. And I hope our specialists will give us the latest information, what is going on, and what is their analysis of the war situation in Ukraine at the moment. Insofar, thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for your readiness. And now I hand over to Ambassador Strohal. Please take the position as moderator. I have to leave, unfortunately, too early, and I really will miss this discussion. I'm sure it will be highly interesting. All the best for you.
Well, thank you, Werner. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I start with an apology. I'm not Martin Seidig, as we have heard. He's one of my best friends in the ministry, and since his greetings, he has no voice. I spoke with him today, and he would have been probably not the most effective of moderators, which he otherwise, of course, is. I am particularly happy that I'm replacing him because I have the fondest memories of our cooperation, particularly from the OSCE times, and I'm very pleased that this discussion is taking place. The subject is, of course, a serious subject, a very serious subject, but the perspectives we will hear, I'm sure, will be very helpful, not only for tonight, but also for what the director mentioned, the sort of the increasing, but still sort of slowly increasing public debate in Austria about security policy today and tomorrow. With that, I will immediately move on to the program. The first speaker is Professor Česnakas, who is the professor with the Security Policy Research Group at the Military Academy, and has a distinguished career already in spite of his, I can say this, age slightly younger than I am. He was head of the political science program at the Academy, has worked specifically on energy resources issues, is working with several scientific journals, has written extensively and researched, and therefore we are very much looking forward to your insights. And I will present it to other speakers as we move on. So Professor Česnakas, please. Or whatever, sure.
It is my great pleasure to be here, and I'm really humbled, and I'm really grateful for the Madam Ambassador and the Diplomatic Academy for this invitation and possibility to share my readings about what is going on in the European security architecture currently. But before beginning talking about that, I will mainly focus on how we ended here where we are, and just for the considerations and the questions for the future. And I probably will begin a bit further than you expect, but I will begin from the examples of Lithuania. Basically, Lithuania has endured the loss of its sovereignty on 2 occasions, during the partitions in the 18th century and again in 1940s. In both instances, Russia, whether in the form of Russian Empire or the Soviet Union, played a central role in these tragic events. These Russian occupations and annexations had served severe consequences, including the suppression of Lithuanian language and culture, forced Russification, restrictions on freedoms, compulsory conscription into Russian or Soviet army, persecution of intellectuals, mass deportations to Siberia, where approximately 132,000 Lithuanians suffered, and nearly 40,000 never returned back home, as well as torture, killings, and other atrocities. Regrettably, we can draw parallels to the situation in Russian-occupied territories of Ukraine, the recent horrors of Bucha and Irpin, the forced imposition of Russian citizenship and military service on Ukrainians in occupied army, and the displacement of Ukrainian citizens, particularly children, are examples that continue to be observed. However, it is important to note that Lithuanians have consistently resisted occupation through the history, including the 18th and 19th centuries, as well as through the armed resistance from 1944 to 53, and later non-armed resistance. After Lithuania regained its independence in Constitution of 1992 clearly declared that the nation would not align with alliances or organizations led by Russia. The historical experiences and suffering suggest that Russia cannot be trusted, at least from the Lithuanian point of view. The part on maintaining sovereignty was to join European Union, providing economic independence from Russia, and NATO, cornerstone of deterrence and defense. Russia employed energy supply disruptions affecting oil and natural gas to enhance its economic and political influence in Lithuania, Latvia, Ukraine, and Georgia, Belarus as well. This energy diplomacy was a binary strategy, offering lower prices for closer cooperation and energy infrastructure transfer, while imposing higher prices on those seeking to distance themselves from Russia. Unfortunately, these choices create political and economical vulnerabilities. Belarus, for instance, traded its sovereignty for lower energy prices and economic support, resulting in the loss of its autonomy. Baltic states and Ukraine were punished by higher prices, negatively affecting economies and creating social tensions. Russia's so-called peacekeepers in Armenia, Azerbaijan, Nagorno-Karabakh, Moldova, Georgia did not maintain peace. Instead, they violated territorial integrity of these nations. Russia consistently regards former Soviet states as part of its sphere of influence, a view evident in the use of terms like near abroad, its passportization policies, and its efforts to portray those countries as lacking sovereignty. This perspective was encapsulated by the Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov in 2016, when he suggested that states that regained independence and set themselves free from Soviet rule were not equally sovereign, implying that they search for the leader. Previously, master was Moscow, now they aligned other leaders, and I quote him. By the way, if honestly look at the situation, small European states that used to be part of Warsaw Pact and now are part of NATO and EU, it is obvious that we should not talking about the transition from subordination to freedom, which Western ideologists love to talk about, but rather about change of leader. They are not able to make significant decisions without go-ahead from Washington or Brussels. End of quote. Just last week, member of Russian ruling party Yevgeny Fedorov has prepared a bill for the State Duma proposing to restore Russian Empire within the borders of the former USSR. The 2014 Russian invasion of Ukraine stemmed from the Ukraine's desire to align with the West, rather than become a Russian satellite, and not because of NATO or EU expansion. Cooperation between the US, NATO, EU, and Russia was strong in the early 1990s, 2000s. New NATO member states did not host new military bases. Defense funding and power in NATO members of Europe had decreased, and the presence of US troops in Europe had declined. Neither NATO nor EU posed a threat to Russia. On the contrary, in Europe, Russia maintained much greater military capabilities next to new NATO members' borders, significant presence of troops in the Kaliningrad region and Pskov, and absolute majority of Russia's military capabilities remain concentrated in Western Military District. NATO and the EU sought a strong democratic Russia as a partner in international affairs, with a robust economy and military cooperation. Let's remember the anti-terrorist coalitions and cooperation over there. They persisted in this pursuit despite Russian aggressions, reluctance to engage on equal terms, and respect for the sovereignty of other states. Unfortunately, Vladimir Putin's ambitions for resurgent Russian Soviet Empire were too great. Russia used a hard and coercive power against its neighbors, compelled them to seek stability, predictability, energy independence, and presence of allies in the Baltic states' territories. The large-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia on February 24, 2022, and the initial reluctance of many countries to provide substantial military support highlight a failure to learn from history with dire consequences for Ukraine. Promise of no more war and no more ethnic cleansing after 1945 in Europe failed in the Balkans in the 90s and again in 2022. Russia's invasion of 2014 and 2020 also exposed the prioritization of many Western politicians for corrupt money, high-ranking positions in Russian energy companies, and business interests over rule of law, transparency, democracy values, basic human rights, and lives of journalists and those who opposed Kremlin. We must acknowledge that the future generations will question why the West, despite positioning itself as morally superior, hesitated to act in line with its professed values, instead prioritizing on short-term economic interests. This reveals a structural flaws in the West, forcing to ask if the West cooperates according to the values it preaches. Systemic flaws are also evident in the failure of international organizations like the United Nations and the OSCE to address the largest war since World War II, raising questions about their relevance to international security. Regrettably, the world is returning to a pre-World War II system where security and predictability are scarce. Great powers are increasingly intensifying their competition, and this lack of order will have a detrimental effect on small states, including those of the European Union. Let us not be naive. If Ukraine fails to achieve victory, which I assume is to restore its territorial integrity with the support of the West, we can be certain that there will be even more countries willing to challenge the existing international order, which will lead to greater instability. Security and defense alliances have become imperative, as demonstrated by Finland and Swedish decisions to join NATO. NATO's Article 5 and EU Reform Treaty's Article 42.7 are the cornerstones of European security. However, it is concerning that countries further from Russia are not eager to increase defense spending and capabilities despite their NATO and EU membership or EU membership, as the alliances are only as strong as their weakest links. Perhaps a greater emphasis on values and commitments with less focus on economic pragmatism could deter Russia from inflicting further suffering on the Ukrainian people. At the current state of affairs, there is a geostrategic imperative to support Ukraine through all available means, exert pressure on Russia to end war and respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine, the core basis of each sovereign country, which basically are accepted among Western partners. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Professor, for this very clear perspective from Vilnius. And I move instantly on to Dr. Juozaitis, who is the head of the World Politics Research Group, also at the Military Academy of Lithuania. He was also lecturing at the Faculty of Political Science and Diplomacy and a fellow at the NATO Energy Security Center of Excellence. Also you, quite a distinguished career already. Please, wherever you want to talk from, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for this kind introduction. And I would like to extend my gratitude to organizers for putting this event together. It is indeed my great pleasure to be here in the Diplomatic Academy of Vienna. Now, I am going to be transparent. Lithuanian history, its geographic proximity to Russia unavoidably influences my thinking, but I am commenting on my personal capacity. So, Giedrius has already provided a good starting point for my talk, and he presented why the Baltic states has a tougher stance on Russia. And he also explained why Kremlin has gradually arrived at the conclusion that military opportunism might be successful. Building on his arguments, I will try to provide also a couple of lessons learned from the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, and identify a couple of implications for the European security we have today. Even though it might sound abstract and even it might sound theoretical, I think we ought to use the precise terminology to describe the events that we have before us today. Russia's war against Ukraine started not in 2022, but it started in 2014. But it had smaller intensity. In 2014 and 2015, Russia launched a series of military and hybrid operations against Ukraine, blatantly violating the Budapest Memorandum. You remember, Russia was supposed to be protecting Ukraine, right? Not invading. In the process, Russia used its armed forces and facilitated armed unrest in Ukraine. You all know the end result. Russia has annexed Crimea, it seized control of Donetsk and Luhansk, and it subsequently established pseudo-republics in the Ukrainian territory. Yet, there was I remember at least a major disconnect between the dominant public discourse at the time and the facts on the ground. Remember the headlines of the major newspapers. They spoke not about the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. It spoke about Ukraine crisis, as if crisis happens on its own. The political language, I would dare to argue, was off the mark as well. For instance, the Minsk protocols wrote about unlawful military formations, mercenaries, militants, and so on, as if these formations have organized themselves, they equipped themselves, and they prevented Ukrainian armed forces from liberating the country by themselves. Since Russia was still interested in maintaining a degree of deniability at that point, watered down political rhetoric played in its favor. And I believe that the lesson for today, that Ukrainian victory in this war under the definition of Ukraine should be the rhetorical emphasis, not the denial of the Russian victory or not the prevention of the Ukrainian defeat. With the latter examples, I think we are talking ourselves into a stalemate. We are not informing our populations about things that we need to do, and it does not help to implement Ukrainian President Zelensky's peace formula. Second point, the responsibility for the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine falls on the Kremlin and the Kremlin alone. Today, just as in 2014, one finds a group of public intellectuals who try to rationalize and to a certain extent even justify Russia's military aggression against Ukraine. Mearsheimer comes to mind first. He claimed that Ukraine crisis was the West's fault, arguing that NATO came too close to the Russian border and it defended its security interests by invading neighboring countries. Another popular cliché in this point maintains that Russian president was cornered by the West, making him desperate, irrational, and aggressive. I disagree with such assessments. Since the end of Cold War, the United States and its European allies worked hard to include Russia in European security architecture and to promote a democratic and economic reform in the country. In 1997, the NATO-Russia Founding Act was signed. A few years later, NATO-Russia Council started working. When the Baltic states became members of NATO in 2013, the alliance shied away from deploying boots on the ground for the sake of not antagonizing Russia. We didn't have NATO's military deployments. In fact, NATO's military presence at the time in the Baltic states were limited to 4 combat aircraft to police the skies of 3 countries. And this was it. At the same time, NATO's militaries were being defunded, downsized, and geared towards expeditionary operations, not for fighting a conventional war against peer competitive and supposedly scared Russian military leadership. If Russia is so terrified of NATO, why it currently redeploys its assets from Kaliningrad, another NATO territory neighboring regions to Ukraine? This brings us to the question of NATO enlargement. After lengthy debates, Ukraine and Georgia have not received membership action plan during NATO's Bucharest summit. We all remember that. I remember that even after Russia-Georgian war, suggestions about drafting Baltic states' defense plans were seemed somehow controversial, as there was a genuine concern about provoking Russia with defense planning. After the first Russian land grab in Ukraine of 2014, Russia maintained its close economic ties with the West, as the dominant mantra of that era was that Russia is difficult but indispensable partner, and we still must cooperate with Moscow. And Ukraine, unfortunately, received limited quantities of Western-made military equipment prior to February 2022. When Russia launched its full-scale military invasion, the West first offered a ride to the Ukrainian president to flee the country, not ammunition to defend it. Hence, to suggest that the West has somehow provoked Russia to invade Ukraine is just factually wrong. This brings me to the third point. Russian military opportunisms brought NATO closer to its borders, so Russia has to thank itself for that. After its military operation in Crimea, NATO has boosted its response time by establishing very high readiness joint task force in the Wales summit. In the Warsaw summit, there was a decision to deploy NATO's enhanced forward presence in the Baltic states and Poland to ensure us and also to deter Russia. At the Madrid summit, the alliance has agreed on a new force model, substantially scaling up its defense and deterrence capabilities with potential brigade-sized deployments where and when needed. Finland and Sweden decided to join NATO. In Vilnius, NATO approved new defense plans and made the case for enhanced defense funding and Ukraine's future membership in alliance. Because of Russia's war, Poland has launched the most ambitious armament program in Europe. Germany has announced Zeitenwende, while Lithuania is scaling its land forces to a division. In the absence of military aggression, Russia would have remained West's economic and political partner, but the Kremlin decided to facilitate NATO's enlargement, armament of its armed forces, and return to its core mission, collective defense. The fourth point. Russia's behavior in occupied territories makes the case for forward defense. Our chairman has devoted his life to defending human rights, so I am sure that he is closely following Russian atrocities in Ukraine. The horrific sights of Bucha and Irpin, among many other crime scenes, informs us about what happens if we allow Russia to occupy territories. Russian occupation leaves scorched earth, with homes looted, innocent civilians killed and tortured, women raped, and Ukrainian children abducted. In addition to Russian military deployments in Belarus, Russia's atrocities clearly tell me that NATO must deter not by reinforcement, it must defend forward. Fifth, despite military setbacks, Russia is not backing down. It seems that Russia is preparing to fight a long war of attrition. The Kremlin deems Russian soldiers expendable, supplementing their ranks with criminals and mercenaries. Russian economy has not collapsed, and Russia is increasing its military budget for 2024. It means that Russia will try to protract the war, hoping for solving disunity in the West during the election marathon that we will have very recently, and building alliances with China, Iran, North Korea, and other countries. It tells us that our planning must reflect these tendencies, and the European security architecture must be built against Russia, while our defense industrial complex needs to be upgraded. And this is my last point. The West can shorten the war if we act courageously by setting up Ukraine on the path of victory. I know that many of my peers think that the West must first and foremost avoid escalation by sending gradual military support to Ukraine, keeping it in the fight, but not actually setting it up for victory. I agree that escalation of war should be avoided, but I think it should not be a self-imposed restriction on our actions. Conventionally, Russia has little to no capability to escalate the war beyond Ukraine. Its land forces are overcommitted, their air forces fail to achieve dominance over Ukrainian skies, while its navy is losing against a country that does not have a navy action. Yes, the question of nuclear weapons remains, but we should not only ask ourselves wherever Russia would dare to use nuclear weapons. We should ask an uncomfortable question. What kind of signal the West sends to a world if we limit weapons deliveries to Ukraine because of nuclear blackmail? I think that it would be a signal of nuclear proliferation, as it would show that if you have nuclear weapons, you can do anything with reckless abandon, making the world more dangerous than we have today. And here, my first thoughts come of Iran, followed by Saudi Arabia. It would also be a signal inviting China to act more assertively in the South China Sea. China is, after all, a nuclear power committed to doubling its nuclear capabilities. Some of the allies are already considering having nuclear weapons in their territory. Poland indicated its desire to become a part of NATO's nuclear sharing arrangements, especially given Russian deployments of nuclear weapons in Belarus. More allies might potentially follow suit, but here we enter into a realm of risky unknown. If we scale up the military support and put Ukraine on the path of victory, we diminish these risks. If we achieve a just peace, we prove that a rules-based world order is not a fictional construct, but actually an enforceable institution. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you very much for this also very compact and very clear picture. I think both of you have heeded the call of the ambassador of the role of history, and at the same time arrived at where we are today, and with all the consequences of this war of aggression. I move on to our last speaker, Major Albin Rentenberger, from the Landesverteidigungsakademie, the National Defense Academy in Austria, who has also a very distinguished career already behind himself. He has been also in deployments abroad, both in Mali and in Kosovo with KFOR. He was involved in the EU presidency of Austria, and he is also, I think, several times the Austrian Austrian champion in fencing. So when you find the time to do all of this, is your. So the floor is yours wherever you want to take it, please.
Yes, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for this introduction and remind me of my old fencing times. It was a little bit time ago. So I will focus today on the military point of view, on the perspective, to give you an overlook about the situation at the front line in Ukraine. And I want also to stress some aspects, strategic aspect, and to try to give you an outlook, how we see the situation evolving, especially regarding 2024. As an officer, I'm used to work with maps. It's a little bit difficult without, but I think we all know now the Ukrainian map very good. So I will start with the situation of this counter-offensive, of the Ukrainian counter-offensive now in September 2023, after more than 100 days. We see there are three main axes of advance. The most known from the media is this in Zaporizhia. I think you know this Robotine, Orchiv, where the Ukrainian forces got through these first Russian lines, and we're here every day that some small steps forwards are done. We have also a second axis of advance in the border between the Oblast Donetsk and Zaporizhia. And finally, we have this third axis of advance in the east, in the vicinity of Bakhmut, especially in the south of Bakhmut, the city which is well known from the first half of the year, where there have been these bloody fightings with the Wagner group. So we see there are in all these three parts small advances, but we don't see a big breakthrough like we saw last year in the region of Kherson and Kharkiv in the north of the country. Why? So we have to remind ourselves that the Russians had 6 months to prepare themselves in this area. So we see their mines, we see their trenches. The Russian engineers did a lot of excellent work to hamper the Ukrainian movements. And this is really, the terrain is very flat, and it's a military nightmare to attack, especially without the covering from the Air Force. So in the north, we have also a part of the country in the area in the vicinity of Kupiansk, where the Russians still have the initiative. They put some pressure in this region, and they fixed their Ukrainian troops, which the Ukrainian forces would need in the area of Zaporizhia. So there is still some small offensive also from the Russian side. And I want also to talk about a front line which is not in the media at the moment. This is Kherson, the Dnipro River. I think you have the pictures in mind of this Kakhovka dam when it was destroyed. There was some tries from the Ukrainian forces to get a bridgehead to come over the Dnipro River. But actually there is a stalemate in this, at this moment. But if the Ukrainian forces would get over this river, this could be also a game changer, actually, because this would be a threat for the Russian front from the west. What we also have to keep in mind, and this is something we hear every day, these are the strikes in the depth of the country. We see Russian attacks in the western Ukraine every day, and also the port of Odessa. So we see now an economical war, actually, against the agricultural structures of the Ukraine. On the other side, and this is actually quite new, starting this summer, I would say, that the Ukrainian, they taking the war to Russia now as well. We see drone strikes to Moscow. We see now several strikes to the Crimea. I remind you, perhaps last weekend, the strikes with the HQ of the Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol, where the admiral, we still don't know if he's dead or not, but actually that was quite a success. So we have this new strikes in the depth of the country. But I want to focus on one sentence, and this would be the key message. This counteroffensive is, of course, important, but it will not end the war. Even if it succeeds, even if the operational aim of the Ukraine, getting through the Azov Sea, which was the operational aim of this operation, even if they succeed this, experts would say that this will not end the war, actually. I would focus now more on this situation of what is the aim of the Ukraine for this operation. So we see that the Ukraine wants to cut off the Crimea from Russia, actually. So on the one hand, they attack. You have this axis of advance in Zaporizhia, direction south, direction Azov Sea. At the moment, we have to say that the perspective, and I don't want to be too pessimistic, but that they reach the Azov Sea in this year, it seems very difficult. But actually, we have to say that if they reach the city of Tokmak, which is possible, then at least they could strike with their artillery to cut off the logistic route from Russia to Crimea. And this would be also already a success. What we also see is the attacks with drones on the sea and from the air on the targets on the Crimea. And last but not least, there is also this famous bridge of Kerch, which is also relaying the Crimea to the Russian motherland. And there were also some spectacular attacks on this bridge, and this could be a target also for the future for the Ukraine. What is very important for the Ukraine, and this is vital for the success, and the speaker before me stressed it out, is the Western support. Because even if the morale is very good, without the weapon systems of the West, the Ukraine cannot continue this war as it does now. And at the moment, you hear all the systems in the media, the 3 systems which are coming next or perhaps not coming. So the F-16 says that this will come, this is already fixed, this will come approximately in the beginning of 2024, because it's very difficult to introduce such a complex system like a jet to the armed forces or to the Air Force. And then there are 2 other systems which are in the media right now. This is the ATACMS and the Taurus. The ATACMS, which will be perhaps provided by the United States. The Ukraine can be quite optimistic that this will happen. And the Taurus from the Germans, which is a ballistic missile as well. And both, at the moment, the Germans are quite reluctant to provide this system. And both systems are used for this war to strike targets in the depth, like the bridge of Crimea, like the HQs in Crimea, or like the ships in the Black Sea. So I heard a very interesting spot of the Republican Party today regarding, for example, the US support. And the US support is now $42 billion of US dollar for the military of Ukraine. This sounds like a lot, especially for Austrian army. But if you compare it to the budget of the whole United States, then they have $1.77 trillion. So in the spot, and I found this very interesting, then they said, we beat 50% of the Russian army with 5% of our budget, with no casualties. So, of course, as an Ukrainian, I would not, it's a very pragmatic sentence, but for an US, or from US point of view, it's very interesting to see the things like that. I want to highlight 2 strategic aspects regarding next year. I think on the one hand, and it was mentioned before, we have an election year, and I think we have to be prepared to see some information warfare from Russia. We know that there were some already, even the US presidential election have been targeted by the Russians, and that's, I think, very probable that they will do this again. We have European elections, and seeing this split between left and right, this is very vulnerable position for democracies, I would say. The other thing we have to observe, especially for the winter, for Ukraine, is the strikes on the critical infrastructure of Ukraine. The Russians striked a lot with this strategic air campaign, the energy facilities, and of course, if in winter time, this can be a very hard time for the Ukrainians if they don't get it to repair this quickly. And we see already that the Russians hold some ammunition back for this period, and this makes us fear that we will see such a strategic campaign again in this winter. So to sum up, the key messages would be that this counteroffensive will not end the war. And we have to remind ourselves that both sides have the capability to go on and to continue this war, personnel and material. But without Western support, the Ukrainian cannot continue this war as it does now. And if we look at 2024, we have to think about one thing. This is the capability of conducting major offensive like we see it now, because we don't have. We shouldn't forget that both sides lost a lot of their leaders, military leaders. They had a lot of victims, a lot of well-trained soldiers, and now we have the second row, which is coming to fight, and it's not easy to predict if these soldiers, which are trained very fast, are able to conduct such large-scale operations as we saw in the last month. So, and I totally agree with my pre-speaker, we will see the continuation of a war of attrition for the next month. But, and this is what I want to say as a military, there is also this black swan, this event we don't know about, which could happen. And so I would say in military, everything can happen. And I remind myself waking up Saturday morning and hearing about a march of justice. I think you all know about who I'm talking about, Evgeny Prigozhin. He was, this was for me a surprise. This was for me a black swan, this revolution. So I think we cannot predict everything, and there could be this possibility of a black swan event, which could, of course, change the war. So with this black swan, I want to end, and thank you for attention. Thank you.
Well, once more, thank you all three for these succinct, if sobering perspectives. Before opening the floor to questions, let me just sort of add a couple of points, because what we have been hearing in a way is that since at least the 24th of February last year, we have been confronted with a war which was thought unthinkable and certainly was not in the overall thinking of being likely at all, in spite of years of clear signals which should have made us think twice. Ever since the 24th of February, we have been continuously discussing a war which is aggressing a country which starts 500 kilometers from here. So in the immediate neighborhood of Austria, there is a war which we all thought was unthinkable, and which we have, therefore, we thank you for reminding us already for the long-term way to where we are today. This has been a long time in preparation, and ever since 2014, the signals were clear to the naked eye, so to speak. Also, I think we have heard very clearly the current military situation and the horrific consequences of that war, specifically for the civilian population in Ukraine. And I think there is a strong effort, just to add maybe to a sort of question you raised vis-a-vis me, a very clear effort to document the atrocities, to document the war crimes, which may be crimes against humanity. This is being done at several levels. At the UN level, there is an International Commission of Inquiry, the secretariat of which is in fact here in Vienna. The OSCE is also documenting and collecting evidence. And this brings me already to the point of the current diplomatic situation. Yes and no. The OSCE is paralyzed in the weekly meetings in the Permanent Council here in the Hofburg. The ambassador knows this much better than I do, because of the Russian blockades. But the OSCE continues to be operational in many regards, including with a support program for Ukraine, including with election observations, and including with field missions in other parts of the OSCE regions, in particular in the 5 Central Asian countries. So the same goes for the International Atomic Energy Agency and for the UN. So there are pockets of activities in spite of the paralyzation and in spite of Russia's diplomatic blockade. Also, we have heard about the current political situation. I think I would just sort of emphasize one point, which is that the unity of Europe, of the European Union, and Europe as a whole, and the West as a whole, has been quite remarkable, and is not something which, again, could have been taken for granted. It was a deliberate effort to demonstrate that a war of aggression today is not acceptable, and that the West stands united in this response to that aggression, and that also demonstrates the relative isolation of Russia globally. Finally, in terms of outlook, I think I take from what you have said one very sobering thought, which is that the sort of any immediate end for this war is highly unlikely, and that we will have to continue to sort of mitigate the consequences of this war as much as we can, while at the same time developing our thinking on the consequences for the security architecture in Europe and beyond. I think with that, I don't want to resume these 3 presentations, but with that, I would like to open the floor for questions, and maybe I take 2 or 3 and then come back to the panel. There is one, there is a second one, and back I see. So maybe, please, yeah.
Good evening. Much has been made of the role of history in this conflict. And I'd like to ask you of the Lithuanian perspective on it, because Lithuania has not only experienced totalitarianism from the Russian and the Soviet side, but also from the Third Reich. And Austria played a major part in that. And whereas Germany, when it discussed the deployment of Leopard 2 in Ukraine, had a vivid discussion on whether tanks should be again rolling in Ukraine and how this relates to history, no such discussion has been ever taking place in Austria. No such lessons of history, like as in Germany, have been discussed in Austria. Austria, according to statistics by the Kiel Institute of World Economics, recently listed by the BBC, is amongst 20 donors in Europe, the one with the lowest per GDP. And if you talk about Western support for Ukraine, you're talking about military support. And like as an Austrian, I feel ashamed because like we don't
send any of this Western support. And I just wonder, you as Lithuanian, like from your perspective, and as being threatened by Russia, how you feel about European solidarity and issues like that if you come to Austria. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman in the back, and then the third hand, and then we do a second round. Well, this is the second round. No, in the back, two hands in the back, please.
Am I asking a question now? Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear me well?
Go ahead, please.
Should I stand up? Okay, hold on now. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Mak Biser. I'm from Bosnia and Herzegovina, but I currently study at the Diplomatic Academy, and this topic is interesting for me because I used to live in Lithuania as exchange student for 6 months. That's why it's for me a pleasure to listen to. And I'll ask you a simple question. How does the Russian aggression towards Ukraine impact Lithuanian society and Lithuanian politics? I'll say like that.
Thank you very much. And in the very back, there was a hand. No, in the very back, maybe the hand has disappeared. Well, then we come up to the front, please.
Yeah. So at first, thank you very much for quite exciting and informative presentations. And I have three short questions, and one is relating about Lithuania. So I want to join with the solidarity of Europe. And then last week, suddenly the Polish Prime Minister Morawiecki declared that Poland stops the provision of weapons, and sure, now at first glance, the conflict between Poland and Ukraine has already calmed down. However, I want to ask what was or what is the reaction of Lithuania? And the second short question is, now the European security architecture is one of the important themes of today. And my question is, what will the European security architecture after the end of Russian aggression or Russian aggression war against Ukraine looks like? So probably, so not the type of OSCE, so all including the peace or political order with Russia, but I think that probably is the security order against Russia, and which cornerstone is of course the European Union and NATO. And the third question is Austria. Now the Austrian government is working on the new security strategy. And now Austria is reviewing its security policy, and Austria and the relation between Austria and NATO is one of the silent or road tema, and probably would be the Austrian accession to NATO is a good choice or best option to prevent raping, kidnapping, or torturing, which now in Ukraine, Irpin, or in Bucha took place. Prevents from it took place in Kittose or in Nickelsdorf in Austria. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for these questions. I think I give you all three the floor, and you take your response to whatever you have you want to pick. Please, let's start.
Thank you for really great questions. First, about leopards in Ukraine, how we assess this. It's simple. Germany now, today, is not the Germany that was during the Third Reich. Germany changed a lot, and it contributed a lot to peace, and it was during basically the Cold War, and even after that, not willing too much to engage in conflicts and act as a, let's say, more passive actor. However, if European countries are committed to peace and defense of the neighbors that have been attacked, I don't see any problems for Germany granting the Leopards to Ukraine to defend itself. The right to defense is the choice of the country. And if Ukraine needs to defend itself from the aggression, I don't see the necessity. Ukraine doesn't attack, doesn't take Russian territories, it defends itself. Concerning the question about society of Lithuania and the political parties, I must say that when the invasion intensified in February, I have not seen such a unified society in Lithuania for a very, very long time. It is as we as a society have been directly affected. People, rich, poor, whatever, were bringing different stuffs for the refugees, coats, blankets, whatever. There was a center near where I live where it was just columns of cars, different, you know, from the best Mercedes to very poor Volkswagens, and they were bringing whatever they could. People just, you know, were sending money to different organizations and supporting military. And political parties in Lithuania basically agree. There are no discussions about support, and there are actually more discussions of how to learn from the examples of Ukraine to strengthen the national defense. The agreements on defense have been signed, and all countries agree, all parties agreed to increase defense spending to 2.5% as the basically floor, probably increased to 3% with the development. So yeah, this is how it looks. Now about the aggression on the society, about Poland, Ukraine, Lithuania considers this that it's not the time to have such a conflict over grain or whatever between Poland and Ukraine, because Ukraine has to defend and win to restore its territorial integrity, and this is the kind of, to some extent, artificial problems raised by politicians in two countries, and the president of Lithuania directly stated that we should come together, and you know, we have more concerning issues rather than these issues. And what will be European security architecture? I don't know how the war will end, because it depends on the distribution of capabilities, power, conditions, how it ends, and so on. So it's a lot of known unknowns, but as well unknown unknowns. So to project it's difficult. But concerning the Austrian position, I respect Austria's position of being a neutral country. It has long tradition. It's for Austrian people and politicians to decide what they want to do. But as an ally, and I stress this, as Lithuanian ally in European Union, where article of mutual defense basically applies 42.7 in the Lisbon Treaty, I would personally like to see a more robust funding of the defense in Ukraine, and a greater role of it in European security, and as well as provision of support to Ukraine. Here I will stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Juozaitis.
To supplement Giedrius' thoughts a little bit, and I think there's a major difference how the Russian Federation understands international politics and how Lithuania understands international politics. Well, in our understanding, each state has the right to choose its own security policy. So if the security policy is neutrality, so I agree with what Giedrius has said. But on this regard, I must acknowledge that I'm not an expert on Austrian politics, but I see that Austria is not blocking actually European Union sanctions, that Austria is supporting Ukraine through European Union mechanisms. So this is already a contribution. Regarding Leopard tanks, I'm not sure that I have understood the question, but I think that it is not an issue of having a Leopard tanks in Ukraine or in Lithuania. It is the question what kind of assignment these tanks are fulfilling. Let me share with you a quick memory. When in the Warsaw Summit there was a decision to deploy a multinational battalion in Lithuania on rotational basis, and Germany actually decided to take a leading role of that battalion. So Russian propaganda has started immediately working. We had a picture of Panzerkampfwagen 3 in Lithuania in 1941, and it says, oh, it happens again. Well, but this time it happens on our invitation, and we are glad that the Germans are in the country, and now we are glad that we are that they have decided to scale their military presence to a brigade level in Lithuania. As Boris Pistorius, the defense minister of Germany, he recently visited Vilnius and made his announcements before the Vilnius summit. Now, there was this question about the Lithuanian reactions and the impact on the Lithuanian political landscape. Just maybe a couple of points to mention. Lithuania has increased its defense spending to 2.5% of its gross domestic product. I think Madam Ambassador has already mentioned that. We are scaling our land forces to a division level. We are buying various equipment. We are buying main battle tanks. We are buying self-propelled howitzers. We are buying HIMARS launchers. So there's a list of what we are going to do to not only rely on the allies, but also to increase our own national defense capabilities. And yes, we support Ukrainian society. We support Ukrainian refugees on different occasions. So I guess I'm going to stop here.
I would just want to add a few details, actually. When we talk about Austrian aid, of course, it's not military, but I want to just to remind that the number I have in mind is 3.2 billion of euro for humanitarian aid or for civilian aid for the Ukraine. Then there was this question for the Austrian security strategy. It's a very interesting point. I think the last strategy was, I think, almost 10 years ago. It didn't change 2014. I think it was written inside that Austria sees Russia in more or less than a partner. 2014 didn't change that, but now there must be some changes, I think. This is work in progress. I want to add that, of course, Austria is part of a NATO Partnership for Peace. We are sending a lot of troops to Kosovo, actually, so we played a role, an important role, actually, at the Balkans. But of course, I think with Sweden and Finland now joining the NATO, there will be some reassessment of the situation, because Austria had Sweden and Finland as perhaps similar situation, but now this will change. Austria will be actually the only big member or on the continent of Europe, which is not part of the NATO. And so I think there will be a reassessment of the situation, but as I said, it's work in progress, and we will see what this will be in future.
Well, thank you very much. Another round of questions, please. Two in the back and one in the front.
Major, sir, Lieutenant Steiner, I have a question regarding the offensive. We see in news a lot about, like, from the point of view from the Western countries, how Ukrainian forces are attacking, but switching points of view and putting on the imaginative hat of the enemy's commander, would you consider Russian forces to be successfully delaying and wearing down the Ukrainian forces and setting the condition for a possible decisive counterattack in the near future? Or are Russians not succeeding with their defensive operation at the moment? Thank you.
Thank you. Also in the back, please.
Good evening. Could you please comment on the alleged peace plan back in 2022 during Boris Johnson's visit to Kiev? And if, in your opinion, do you think it would have been better or worse for the future course of events had a peace plan been reached back then in 2022 when Boris Johnson visited Kiev? Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman in the second row, please.
Thank you for all the information you gave to us. I want to restrict myself to the military point of view. Russia might not win the war, but I'm convinced that Russia will not lose the war from a military point of view. So we could end up with a situation where on the battlefield there is no solution. What could be the political solution if there is no solution on the battlefield?
Okay, maybe a final question in the third row. Thank you.
Sorry, I wanted to ask about Russia is now in a war economy, therefore stepping up very fast its production. And I wonder about Western countries, in how far they are stepping up, and private companies, it may take more time. So there may be a gap. Thank you.
And the final question in the next row.
As far as I know, wars are very expensive. As much as I've heard, people keep repeating Ukraine cannot win this war. The Western, the Western states, USA and EU, they've spent, I think, $500 billion so far. I don't know what about the equivalent would be in terms of military outfit, etc., of Russia. Russia cannot have endless resources. How do you see it? Can they stand continuing this war and practically against the economic power of the West, or will they run out of their resources, which I hope?
Thank you. Back to the panel, please. No, maybe from the other side, yes.
I will start with the question about delaying the counterattack, if this would be a success. Yes, I think this is a success, because I think I read that the plan was to reach the Azov Sea in 14 days, and now it's day 100. So delaying, for sure, that was the Russian had this success. We shouldn't forget that the Russians not only defend, there's, as soon as the Ukrainians take the position, there is several artillery attacks, there are some counterattacks from the Russian side, and so there's a very bloody and very, very difficult way the Ukrainians are fighting here. So this is very, very difficult. So this is I would say this is not because the Ukrainians are performing bad. It's just because it's a very, very difficult and tough situation. And the Russians had 6 months to prepare themselves. For the endless resources, as I said, for next year, the resources will be here. And we shouldn't forget that Russia didn't switch to a war economy, perhaps when you think about Second World War, where 50% of the economy went to war. This is not the case. And they didn't put all their personnel in this war. They don't send, for example, their recruits, so their conscripts at the moment into this war. They push them afterwards to sign the contract. But during the service, they don't push them. So, because, of course, this would be difficult for to sell to the population. So we are not at the end of the resources on both sides. And I think at least it's difficult to make to look in the far future, but for next year, the resources will be unfortunately here. And the last point I want to mention is Russia loses the war or cannot lose the war. I thought about I have a little bit I thought about this thing a lot, and there is this war in Ukraine, but there is also this war against the West, which is also always mentioned by Putin and in the narrative. And I don't know, I see it like this. Russia has now 2 new countries in NATO after this war. Russia is very dependent on China, and they gained 100,000 square kilometers in Ukraine. And in my opinion, this big war to the West, it's not a good direction they're heading here, I think. Of course, for Ukraine, it's a tough situation, but on the big scale, we have to think what this means for Russia on the long term, also this war. This is my personal point of view, of course. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions. And some comments starting from Boris Johnson's visit in Kiev. I must confess, I do not remember what was actually said about that peace formula, but what I had in mind is the Zelensky's plan to actually achieve a just peace. And in my estimation, without the military defeat of the Russian armed forces, the just peace, so-called, cannot be achieved. Now, I'm in a danger zone actually commenting about military affairs, because I most focus on the security policy. But one point on that: why are we seeing slow progress of the Ukrainian armed forces, as it was mentioned here today, and why do we hear many criticism actually that Ukraine's supposed to do this, Ukrainians supposed to do that? But we have to acknowledge that Ukraine is fighting, not having sufficient means to fight a war, what it means for NATO. We do not have aerial dominance, we don't have superior firepower. In certain instances, we only have parity, and in certain areas, so it's very difficult. Now, regarding the question on resources, I would agree with the major that Russia actually has resources, unfortunately, to continue the war, because, well, they lost natural gas exports practically fully to the European market, with a very minor deliveries remaining, but we are still exporting oil. Technological materials also are ending up in Russia via different countries, so we have to do better on sanctions in that regard. And there's also the question of oligarchs and state-owned enterprises. So we see actually information that the Russian government has asked Gazprom, for example, to make an additional contribution for the war effort. So Russia has resources. And also there's the question of cooperation and alliances with different countries as we go forward. The temptation will be there, actually. Now, the question about the political solutions, if we actually arrive at a stalemate, if I understood the question correctly. So I think all options in that regard are not good, because if we arrive at a stalemate, we have the risk of Russian rearmament. If I remember correctly, yes, last year we have one of the first successful Ukrainian counteroffensives, which liberated Izum, which liberated the Kharkiv region, and well, Ukrainians could not capitalize on that success because we lacked the material to do so. Russia has reconstituted, it has built a multi-layered defense, and now we have the situation that we have today. So I think if we arrived at a stalemate, Russia would reconstitute its forces and most probably will go for military intervention somewhere again. Now, we still should remember that Russia maintains a foothold in Belarus, right? And it's bad news for Lithuania, actually, because before 2020, we had only a very minor presence of Russian armed forces. Now the presence might be much higher. And I think if we arrive at this stalemate, we, as I mentioned in the speech, actually, we send the wrong signal. We send the wrong signal that with the nuclear blackmail, we are limiting our support, and the nuclear proliferation is the right way to go, actually, for some countries. Not to mention that I think it would form a resentment in Ukraine that well, victory and the liberation of the territories was not achieved. So sorry for speaking so long.
Probably on the last question, because it's very multi-layered. Question about does Russia has resources? Answer is yes. At what cost? Now, for the next year, Russia announced that it will increase official defense spending by 70%, which will reach about 107 billion US dollars. It is double the size of the expenditure on education, healthcare, and environment combined. So you see where are their priorities. So they can prolong war, they can conduct war as long as it takes at the cost of their citizens, of their lives. And here we have a problem because we think about Russian culture, society, and the state as if it was a Western type of society, state, and culture. It's wrong. It's absolutely different because from reading Russian geopolitics, reading Russian history, reading Russian writers, you see that it has never been the country of the citizens. It has been the country of, let's say, governing elites and feudals who assigned areas of control for a particular time. And how the many people in Russia, not the center Moscow, not the center of Petersburg, live very differently from what we imagine. Some of them only received natural gas 15 years ago to their flats. Some doesn't have plumbing, and they don't care about this. Why? Because they don't have a lot of income, and their sons are being sent to the war. If they die, they receive a new car, receive some money, which have never dreamt of these sums. They had to work for a couple of years to receive it. And those who go to fight voluntarily also earn money. So this is where the initiatives are. The costs are enormous. According to statistics, I think it's about 280,000 combats on the Russian side are dead. But having in mind, do Russian politicians really care? And I mean, well, politicians address is not very good word in that country, but basically the elites who are in power do really care about their societies. And I really, really highly doubt, because the society exists to be exploited or used for the interests of the elites. And here we have the system. Here we have the system, and they can continue. They can continue export natural gas because Belgium, France, Spain buys about 50% of Russian LNG. They can continue to export oil on market, basically nearly market levels to China, India as well, just gave with the tankers that are insured not by Western companies but by Chinese, Indian companies, whatever. And then Western countries, Italy, France, as well others, buy refined diesel, gas from India back to the countries. So on the one hand, we support Ukraine, give weapons, give you humanitarian aid. On the other hand, we put money into pocket to continue the war, to have the resources, finances. And society can be mobilized. Children in schools now are basically obliged to learn how to shoot Kalashnikovs. That is their priority, not the science, not the medicine, not you know how to deal with the social issues, but that is their priority. So for that reason, they have the resources. And returning to the West, Russia's total GDP is about 1.7 trillion US dollars, approximately. Germany is about 4 point something. So, and we kind of in the democratic countries that basically make about 45% of world GDP say that we cannot increase manufacture of weapons or supply of weapons. That kind of feels for me very unconvincing, to say the least. Germans could build 3 LNG terminals in less than 1 year, but for some reasons they cannot build additional munitions lines into existing factories. So we should reconsider the priorities in the West in order to think and properly think about Russia, how it's structured, and not to think about it as it is in the Western societies and countries.
Thank you. A last round of questions. The gentleman in the second row has been very patient, please.
Dankeschön. Helmut Malnick, old age pensioner. In the course of the war, Russia has deprived the Ukraine of all its ports to the Black Sea. So actually the Black Sea has become a mare nostrum for Russia, except for the gauntlet of Odessa. This umbilical is being harassed by the Russians and blackmailed. Are the laws of the Bosporus still valid so far that the Western navies cannot aid with their mighty navies to keep this gauntlet open for the Ukrainian corn exports?
Thank you.
And another thing is, I personally think, that the war cannot be ended but by a major disaster. Sorry.
Thank you. We want to avoid major disasters. I saw a hand in the back. If not, last chance. Then we come back once more to the panel, please. Maybe again in the original order. Yes.
Here is the tricky. Actually, I will comment on the comment of the moderator. We try to avoid the disaster. The question is, does Russia tries to avoid the disaster? I would like to assume that Putin built dachas all over Russia, in Sochi, whatever, you know, very nice palaces, not to be destroyed by nuclear weapons. I would like to believe, but I cannot know. And sitting in his bunker, I don't know what he's thinking even. So, but about this Black Sea, well, I think that what signals now NATO sends or the West
it's to avoid direct clash. Between navies, between aircrafts, so not to escalate, not to make it a Russia-NATO war. NATO does this. Does Russia is a partner on a similar approach? It is the question, and I kind of doubt watching how the drones in the international waters are harassed by Russian fighters and so on. So I think that a lot of is in the hands of Turkey on Bosphorus passing that, but the West will try to avoid, even when in Romania they find the scraps of the drones. I mean NATO tries to avoid any escalation that is not necessary, at least from the NATO. So they're doing their best not to go into direct confrontation. So that's my reading.
A presentation need not be a provocation.
The provocation might be on the other side.
Please, Dr. Juozaitis.
Just perhaps one point. There's a question wherever it is truly the Black Sea, the Russian internal lake, as you have described. There's a question if the Black Sea is truly so as an internal lake, as you have described in your question, because even Ukraine does not have a navy. It actually can have operations in the Black Sea, and it can also answer Russia. For example, when the grain deal collapsed, all Ukrainian unmanned sea vehicle actually attacked a tanker. It was an empty tanker of the Russian Federation, and also the ships are sinking of the Russian Federation. So maybe yes, and in ports actually. So maybe just a short comment and a little bit of disagreement.
Thank you.
I just want to pick up two words from your question, and this is corn and disaster. Of course, now whole Europe is focusing on Ukraine, but we shouldn't forget the crisis in Africa, in the Middle East. And I think about the Arabic Spring, which was the origin was, I think, the prices for the food actually in Tunisia. And having this in mind, I have to say that perhaps we will see another disaster in another region coming as a second order effect because of this grain deal, corn, etc. So we should not only focus on Ukraine, but what does it mean for the rest of the world, because we forget about all the other crises. As you mentioned, I was in Mali, working there for 7 months, and I saw my my work is over. There is no input anymore because now the Wagner Group took over. So this we should keep in mind, that there are other crises around the world which we perhaps lose on our focus, but they didn't disappear.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, of course, to the organizers of this evening. And secondly, and more importantly, to the three of you, and for the insights you have brought. I think you deserve a great round of applause. Thank you so much, and thank you for bringing us the perspective from Lithuania. I think you reminded us of the importance of history. I can add the importance of geography too. I mean, this is a frontier country. You have a frontier with Russia, with Kaliningrad or Königsberg. So there is a closeness which makes this perspective particularly important. And my last point is thank you to you all who have been here and who have been, in a way, relativizing the director's opening point that there is not enough discussion in Austria. I think the discussion has been growing, and thank you all for this. And I understand there will be a glass served outside. Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for coming. And bon voyage. No, thanks a lot, really.
Thank you.
Very good.